The following program deals with the serious and sensitive subject of suicide. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Voices for Mental Health. Real people, real stories, real hope. My guest today is Markita Madden. We are going to talk about the common risk factors for suicide, suicide prevention, and how to approach someone who you think may have suicidal thoughts. Markita Madden was recently named the Executive Director at American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the Virginia chapter. Welcome, Markita, to the podcast, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Candace, for the invitation.
You came all the way to Charlottesville from Harrisonburg, correct?
Yes.
And you're a native of Harrisonburg.
I am a Harrisonburg native, yes.
Well, congratulations on your appointment as Executive Director.
Thank you for that.
Tell me and the audience a little bit about how long you've been with the foundation and your roles so far.
Okay. I started as a volunteer with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention in 2017. In July of 22, I became the programs manager, and then in January, I became the executive director for the chapter.
What drew you to the position, if I might ask? And is it a personal?
There is a personal connection, and I don't mind sharing. My family has experienced 3 losses to suicide.
Oh my.
And so after the 3rd loss in 2017, I joined a support group, and in that support group, I learned about the local Out of the Darkness walk. And so my family put a team together, and we were really surprised by the support that we received from our loved ones and friends and family around us as we raised funds for the cause. And then the next year I was asked to chair that walk.
Oh, wow.
And I took it on because it was a passion of mine, and joined the board of AFSP here in Virginia, and ultimately came to work for them when a position opened.
I'm sorry to hear about all your losses.
Well, thank you for that.
But obviously your shared experiences makes a huge difference to everybody in your circle, right?
Yeah, and I really do. People say, you know, it's weird for me to say that this is my dream job now, but I feel like my purpose was kind of prepared for me, beyond my control, but in a way I've been prepared to do the job that I'm doing now.
How does it feel to be in the position of executive director at such a large and impactful organization?
I'm not going to lie, it's been a little overwhelming. I am very much a servant leader. And we're a volunteer-driven organization. Most of the work is done by our volunteers, and most of those volunteers have a connection to the cause. And so I really take it to heart, the time that they give us, the passion they put behind the mission, and just want to do well.
Let's talk about the Out of the Dark walk, which I have been on myself. Mm-hmm. So kudos for that. How many people does it take to put on something like that? How many volunteers and staff? Do you have any idea?
I couldn't give you a total number for the country. We have, we have 73 chapters across the country and in Puerto Rico. Every chapter is a little bit different in the number of walks that they host, and every community puts their own spin on it. But it is a big production. I can tell you, for example, here in Virginia, our largest walk is in Richmond, and it takes a big crew to put that one together.
I've also done the one in Richmond as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a great organization. Mm-hmm. And sadly, so many millions of people are affected by suicide and their families.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell people, if I'm out and I have something on that identifies me as someone who works in this field or works with AFSP, and same thing for our volunteers, it is rare that we can go out and run errands just on a Saturday and come back home without somebody approaching and saying or sharing their story with us.
I imagine that that's both fulfilling and also kind of sad.
Yeah, it is very fulfilling because a large part of what we try to do is get people to open up and talk about these experiences so that hopefully other people won't experience loss or will know they don't have to struggle alone. So creating the conversation around it is important to us. But yeah, it's sad to know that so many people have been impacted.
I mean, and from what I understand, suicide is preventable, correct?
We do believe that suicide can be prevented. There are certainly risk factors that we can look for. There are warning signs that we can look for. We can encourage people to be proactive about their mental health. And we can just create that culture where it's okay that we treat our mental health the same way we treat our physical health.
Exactly. You mentioned that there are signs that warning signs that people can see, hear, taste, whatever. What would you say some of those are? Can you share them with us?
And I mentioned risk factors too, and risk factors are just like for any other health condition. They would be those factors that are a little more enduring over time. So I'll give you an example. As a loss survivor myself, that is considered a risk factor for me. That doesn't mean that I'm in imminent danger, but all things considered, that is a risk factor. But the warning signs would be those things that let you know that maybe somebody is approaching a crisis. And generally they're expressed in the way that they talk, in their behaviors and in their mood. So are they talking about ending their life? Are they talking about feeling like being a burden and ending the pain? With their behavior, are they doing things that's just out of the norm for them? And then with their mood, are they down? Are they expressing things in a way that lets you know they are feeling overwhelmed and desperate?
I would imagine, and I'm not a therapist. I come at this position as a journalist, but I would imagine when they're starting to talk about wanting to end their own life, that's pretty much a crisis situation.
Yeah.
How do we avoid that crisis situation, and what earlier signs can we notice or observe in somebody?
Okay. Yeah, those risk factors would be those things like I mentioned. Are there, do they have a history with suicide? Have they lost someone close to them? Do they have, topping that list would be mental health conditions. Are they someone who struggles with depression or anxiety or substance use disorder? Are there environmental factors like have they lost a job? Are they going through a breakup? Are there things obviously going on around them? And also in those environmental factors, all things considered, because it's never just one reason, it's the combination of those risk factors, right?
Right.
So all things considered, an environmental factor to really take seriously would be if they have all these risk factors at play, now do they have access to lethal means? And those are things that you want to look for. And those are the things that would lead you to just begin to have some conversations. And the number one thing we can do is be proactive.
So talking about proactive, and I think it's probably hard for anybody, but some people harder than others, to approach somebody who they think may be having these suicidal thoughts. What are some of your recommendations that you would give to somebody if they thought they wanted to have that conversation with somebody to try to help that person and prevent that suicide?
Yeah, there's some things we definitely encourage people to do, and there's some things we encourage them not to do. You don't want to belittle what they're going through or make it feel minimalized. You want to not try to fix everything for them in that moment, but the number one thing that you can really do is listen. Give them the space. Let them know that you're a trusted person and that you're going to listen. Let them know that you care and kind of express to them the things that have led you to have that conversation with them. And then it's a big myth that if we ask someone directly about suicide, we're going to plant the idea. What we know actually is that if you ask the idea, it's almost, I imagine it like a relief for people. Now you've said the words and you've asked the question, and now I'm comfortable opening up and talking to you about this. So don't be afraid to ask the question directly. Another thing that we often do is maybe say, are you thinking of doing something silly? Or are you thinking of hurting yourself? And someone who's approaching that crisis, they don't see suicide as something silly or hurting themselves. They see it as an end to the pain that they're experiencing. So they see it as a solution to a problem. So that's why we also want to be very direct in what we ask them.
Is there any research on, I guess, the connection between mental health and suicide, and at what point or what age somebody might be contemplating, or can that be at any age?
Yeah, suicide does not discriminate. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention was founded as a research organization. In fact, we're the largest private research organization in the country. And so there's been a lot of research around that, a lot of following the statistics too. And in a nutshell, suicide does not discriminate. Age, race, all those other factors, it doesn't matter. Anyone can be at risk for suicide. there are groups that are at a greater risk, and sometimes we see those trends shift, but it doesn't discriminate.
So that brings me to the question about construction, hope for healing or hope for...
We are planning here, and a lot of our chapters are going to be rolling out this event, but in addition to our Out of the Darkness walks this year, we're going to be hosting a construction hike for hope.
Hike for Hope.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep. And we've hosted a hike for hope here in Virginia before. It's changing in the sense that we are now putting a focus on the construction industry with it, because the construction industry is unfortunately an industry that's hit very hard by suicide for a variety of reasons. We know that in that industry, 5 times more people are lost to suicide than to job accidents.
Really?
Yes.
That's astounding and very frightening.
Yes. Yeah. So part of the reason that we're doing the work that we're doing.
Oh, and it's great work. You said that sometimes the shift changes in some of the areas where people are at higher risk for suicide. So are there other, like, I've always thought that lawyers might be at a high risk, people with very intense jobs. So can you share some of the other potential areas that might be at higher risk?
The healthcare profession, that's still one that's at high risk. We're talking about construction, but the mining industry is also one that's really hit hard. And some of the reasons with some of these, and veterinarians, for example, I'll be attending our state veterinary conference next week and doing some prevention programming, education there with them. And you think about those groups, the medical groups and the veterinary groups, and you think they have hard jobs. They have to care for people, and sometimes they lose and animals, and sometimes they lose those people and animals, right? In the mining and construction industry, we're dealing with things like instability with work. Construction industry, maybe they're away from their families for a long period of time, and other things that just the toll it takes on your body. All of those things combined together, and those are things that we're looking at, but really trying to help them create that culture that we talk about, where it's okay in that industry to talk about the struggles and acknowledge that they're taking place.
And I think that's one of the biggest, I think we have problems in mental health, is people not having these conversations, these tough conversations.
Definitely, and our staple program in our education portfolio is called Talk Saves Lives, and that theme carries through everything, all of our programming, that just getting people to have that conversation. And I know even within my own family, having experienced the losses that we've had, that's something that's been very important to me. And so I think it multiplies out into our communities to, are we approachable? Do people know that where their resources are before they need them? Do people understand that seeking mental health help is not a sign of weakness? That we don't have to be in crisis to seek that help. Sometimes we don't wait until the war's already taking place to begin to prepare for it. So seeking that help and just acknowledging that everybody struggles. Everybody struggles.
Very true. Since you brought up your family again, and that you have had 3 suicides in your family, I can't even imagine, first of all, what that would be like, but the conversation around it. So when the first person took their own life, what was that like in your household, and what was it talked about? Did you have a conversation? Did people go to therapy?
No, I'll be honest. It was in 2006. It was we lost one of my brothers as he was he had transitioned out of the military and adjusting back to civilian life. And we didn't talk about it. None of us, not even among my family. And I think the response we got from people in our community, the people that did say something about it, some of the things they said to us are honestly quite foolish, and made us feel a little probably insecure about talking about it. And then in 2016, I lost my father. And 8 months later, I lost my youngest brother.
Oh, my word.
And so after that happened, I knew I had to be proactive for our family. And so in seeking to be proactive for our family and offer them support and knowing what to look for. In that situation, I started, what I started doing just for my family kind of evolved into how can we now help other families. And I have people in my family who still won't talk about it very much or not as open about maybe their struggles. But they've given me the grace and the liberty to kind of be the family spokesperson and to go forward and share, especially if I think it's going to help someone else.
You mentioned that people came up to you to talk about your brother's suicide and maybe said some things that were not maybe helpful. Can you share some of the things? I know it's, we all handle things differently, but maybe from your perspective and your experience and background, what are some of the things that people would rather not hear when you're having this discussion? I mean, what could trigger them or,
One of the things that's been, I think, very triggering for some of my family members is a lot of us are people of faith, and we come into that debate of you've lost someone to suicide, where are they at now? And, for me, I said, anybody who wants to come and just have that argument with me, they're peace stealers. Give me what allow me to believe what I need to have that peace about this and to be able to go forward and do my work. Also, sometimes people seem to feel like they can catch suicide. And I think they look at us, look at our family sometimes and say, who's going to be next? And they've never said it directly, but, now we've got kind of this reputation for.
So it's that stigma.
Yeah, we've got that stigma around the family now that sometimes we have to fight. And I shouldn't say fight it because I guess I'm at a point where I do this work, I no longer care. I'm at a point, I think, where if it's going to save somebody, then we're going to do what we have to do.
Absolutely, and that's why we do what we do at Voices for Mental Health,
yes.
Because we know from experience and research that sharing one story makes a huge difference in the lives of somebody else.
Yes.
People need to feel that they're not alone and that their experience is not unique, and that talking about it does help.
Yeah, and we have those stories, but we also have equal number, probably more stories of people who have come to us and said, thank you for sharing your story. Because you shared these things, because you helped to educate us about things we should look for, I was able to get help for a family member, or I recognized that I was beyond the, personally people have recognized that I was at a point where maybe I needed to seek some help and I was struggling and I didn't let anybody know. And that is encouraging.
Absolutely. How is the organization funded?
We are a private organization. We don't receive any government funding. We were founded in the mid-'80s by families and researchers who wanted to explore the question, why are people dying by suicide? And so we've always been a privately funded organization. We're volunteer driven. So we have, for example, here in Virginia, we have 3 staff members, but most chapters right now still only have 1 staff member, and everything else is done by volunteers.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yes.
It's a big task.
We have, we've been talking a lot since we got back from our chapter leadership conference in Houston earlier this month, where all 73 chapters came together for meetings and trainings and preparing for the upcoming year. But we've been talking a lot about the fact that this is hard work, but it's heart work.
Right.
And so,
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I like that, hard work, but heart work. Absolutely. So if someone wants to contribute and support the organization, can you tell us how we can do that?
Yeah, they can visit our website at afsp.org. I would encourage people to look for your local chapter and get connected at the local level. And from there, you can look up the chapter that's closest to you.
And you run a hotline as well, is that correct?
We do not run the hotline.
Okay.
We don't run the hotline. That hotline is they're a national partner of ours. We've done and we continue to do a lot of advocacy work to make sure that all of the funding that it needs to be maintained and expanded and go forward from here. We do a lot of work around that, and we'll continue to do a lot of that advocacy work to make sure that infrastructure continues to be built out. But we don't offer any crisis services. We work solely on the prevention side.
Gotcha, and that's critical. I mean, I think that's what we need more than anything at this point.
Yeah, and we say, prevention is postvention. Or postvention is prevention.
Right, right. In terms of culture, because we're very much in a culture area at this point, do you see certain areas being remiss and not getting the education that they need to prevent suicide?
There are some cultures that are more resistant, and we're trying to develop programming to help us reach those cultures. We know that veterans, for example, tend to be at a greater risk. We're developing programming for veterans and for military personnel. Over the past couple of years, we've launched a program specifically for the African American community. I've seen personally very good response to that. If you can get before a group of people, the community is very much ready to have the conversation. But sometimes just getting before them to have that conversation. Same thing with the Latinx community. Again, if we can get before the community, anybody who comes in and is willing to sit, knowing you're going to be talking about mental health and is willing to sit down, generally they're ready to have the conversation with you. So those are things that we continue to work on. There's a large focus on middle schoolers and high schoolers and some programming we do there. And any group that might be at an elevated risk.
And we talked early on in the interview about having the means to commit suicide. And I think we need to go there and ask, what are some of those means and how can we keep them being available to protect the persons that are in our households?
Definitely. Well, the majority of suicides involve a firearm. And so while we don't take any stance on gun control, we very much promote gun safety and firearm safety and safe storage. As a matter of fact, when we were part of our advocacy efforts this year have been around, specifically in Virginia, but I'm sure there are other places that are doing it as well. Sending notices every year to remind parents that if you have a firearm in your home, to store it safely, and medications, things like that you can store safely. A lot of, even in my travel, I see that a lot of bridges that are being rebuilt, they're having barriers go up on them. I see that and get excited because I know that that's probably been the result of some advocacy efforts. Carbon monoxide sensors, so that vehicles shut off when the levels get too high. And I'll say another risk factor that I didn't touch on is, is your loved one maybe looking for a method? Are they looking to purchase a firearm? Are they searching online for methods that they can use? That would be one of those warning signs that you want to take note of.
Is there any advocacy or efforts being made to follow those searches online, to identify those people that are searching for?
None that I'm aware of, but that's a really good question. We do have a public policy office in DC that supports all of our efforts across the country and in Puerto Rico.
To me, that's a red flag. I mean,
and that's a good question to go back and ask them, because sometimes things are being introduced and haven't really come to fruition yet, but those are things that they follow closely for us.
Is there some advice that you could give to our listeners who have had a loved one, family member, friend even, or coworker who has committed suicide, how to help them with their healing?
Yeah. I'll mention 2 programs that AFSP has, but aside from those, I would just encourage you to seek the help that you need, seek the mental health support that you need to get through that grieving process, to continue that grieving journey. I don't know that it ever ends. Certainly do that. Don't be ashamed to do that. But we have 2 programs. One is called Healing Conversations. And so if you reach out to AFSP, you'll be matched with a local trained volunteer, or semi-local to you, as local as we can get, who has had a similar loss. And they've been trained really just to kind of have a conversation with someone and kind of walk with them as they begin that grief process. And then there's another program that we host every November. It's always the Saturday before Thanksgiving. It's International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day, or Survivor Day, we call it for short. And it's a time where people in our communities can come together. Generally, there's a mental health professional on hand to talk a little bit about the complicated grief process that's associated with someone dying by suicide. AFSP produces a survivor story film every year, and those are always really good. And just fellowship, generally a craft and some food, but again, kind of reinforcing that we're not alone. that we recognize too that the holidays can be a very tough time for us, and what we can do, kind of reminding us of what we can do to kind of cope with that grief during that time.
So how do you assess the immediacy and severity of suicide risk in a person?
To sum that up, I would say always trust your gut. If you think that someone is approaching a crisis, if it's just that your spidey senses are going off and it's somebody close to you and you maybe can't put your finger on it, but maybe it is that they're doing some reckless things. Maybe they're spending money recklessly. Maybe they are giving possessions away. Maybe they're sleeping too much or too little. That maybe they're withdrawing from things they normally enjoy doing. Maybe they're talking about taking their life. Maybe they are, sometimes I always bring this one up in presentations that I do, maybe they're angry, just overwhelmingly frustrated to the point of anger. But I say the advice always is trust your gut. Go ahead and have that conversation.
I think that's a great advice. A little hard to follow sometimes. I know personally, we all have our gut feelings and then we go, we'll just, no. But trust your gut. I think that's a really good advice.
And assume that don't assume that someone else is going to reach out. Assume you're the only person that's going to have that conversation.
And that's another really good advice or tip, because I think all too often we expect somebody else to do it. And so we shy away from it thinking, well, somebody else will take care of it, but not always. And that can mean one life saved if you're the person who speaks up and says to that person, I'm here, I'm ready to listen.
Yeah, I very much am a believer of go ahead and do it. I can live with regrets better than I can live with losing someone or someone being angry or upset with me that I asked them a question in that moment. Hopefully they're going to be relieved. And even if they're not in a crisis, if you're noticing things, maybe they just need that opportunity to vent and share some things. But it sets the stage for if they approach that crisis.
I think we're going to end it on that note because we're really running out of time. But Markita Madden, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your knowledge. And I'm sure we're helping a lot of people with this podcast. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And to all those listening, remember, you are not alone.